Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Wandering Road podcast. I'm your host Chris, alongside my co-host Dean, and for today's show, we are going to be covering the Snedeker family haunting, or also known as the haunting in Connecticut. Welcome back to the show, buddy. We missed you last week.
Yeah, dude, that's what happens when you are a parent and you get your times mixed up. I
Yep.
literally, I was like putting together some furniture. I was like, oh shit, like I have the podcast right now, and I like jump up and I get everything ready, and then I text you. I'm like, sorry, man, I'm late. Like, are you guys starting? And you text me. Would you text me back?
We're done.
That's it. That's all you said. We're done.
We're done.
And for a second, I thought you were talking about us. You're like, oh, we're over. We're
Yeah.
done.
Get
You're
out of here.
fired.
Get out of
You're
here.
fired, Simpson.
Pack up your shit and leave. I'm kidding. Shit
But yeah,
happens.
man,
It
I
is
know.
what
I'm
it is.
excited for this one though. This is like when you sent me the topic for today, I'm like, okay, this sounds like a pretty, black and white typical, but then Haunting in Connecticut's really popular and it's famous, right? And I haven't thought about it in years. And we found all kinds of awesome information. I feel like that like you don't really see even in like documentaries, like specific stuff like the address. And I'm looking at it on Google Images right now it's so funny. There's like dead wood everywhere around the house. It's so creepy looking. I've never seen so much dead forest around a residential area in my life. Yeah, but I'm excited to talk about the story and where it took place and whatnot.
This was one of my favorite topics, especially when I saw it on the show A Haunting. Back in the day when it came out, those were one of the first few episodes. And also, there's a few movies about it. There was one from 2009 called A Haunting in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are a couple of more iterations. I forget what year they came out, if you know.
Yeah, so 2002 was the first one, I think. So the event took place in 1986, and the first movie that they did on it, I think, was 2002. That was considered like a documentary slash thriller. It's actually rated pretty well on Google. I might have to rewatch. I'm pretty sure I watched it before, but I might have to watch that again.
So let's jump into the story of the haunting of the Snedeker family. So we're going back all the way to 1986, where Carmen and Alan Snedeker, they have quite a few kids, Philip, Bradley, Alan Jr., and Jennifer. They lived in upstate New York at the time, and something started happening to their son Philip. He started getting sick. When they took him to the doctor, turns out that he has Hodgkin's lymphoma. The problem that they ran into is that in order for Philip to get his treatment, they would have to do a 300-mile round trip from upstate New York to Connecticut frequently so Philip can get his treatment.
Dude, that's so sad. Like, that's not only are they dealing with that, but to have a serious haunting series of events that are just scary and unexplainable happen at the same time. Like, I can't imagine going through like double, like that's double curse. Like, that's double terrible.
Definitely a stressful time for the family. So they made the decision that it would probably be best for the family to move to Connecticut to be closer to the hospital for Philip to get his treatment. So they made the decision to search for places to live. They eventually found a place they could rent that would take a family with 4 children. And that was the 208 Meriden Avenue in Southington, Connecticut. This was pretty close to the hospital that Philip was going to treat his Hodgkin's lymphoma. Here's the thing. They talked to the landlord. They're like, cool, you can move in. We got a pretty big family. He's like, that's not a problem. We're just finishing up some renovations to the home. So you can stay in this portion. You can stay in this apartment of the home while the renovations are going on, yada, yada, yada. So they agreed to do that. They signed the paperwork, they put the money down, whatever. They move into the house, and what do they find? In the basement, they find leftover mortuary equipment.
Oh my God.
Which indicates what, my friend?
Dead bodies everywhere.
Yep, dead bodies. That this home was a funeral home being converted into a rental property. And prior to it being purchased by the landlord and converted, it functioned as a Hallahan funeral home for quite some years. So as soon as they get into the house, the traditional thing like kids like to do, everybody likes to go claim their room. So the older boys decided to stay in the basement bedrooms, which was down the hall from the embalming room.
Wow. And they must not have known when they first got there. Like that you suspect relatively quickly, like, okay, well, the dead bodies used to be here, but you probably they didn't come to find out what rooms were used for what. Imagine you move into a house and you don't know the history in it, but then you like slowly start learning things that just get worse and worse. Like, oh, Jimmy, by the way, we found out today that your room is where they used to drain the blood out of dead people. Sleep tight.
Yeah, which is crazy. And what's funny is that Carmen was like, talked to the landlord and was like, what the fuck? I wasn't
Yeah.
told this. The guy was like,
Too
leave the
late. You signed the
equipment.
contract.
Pretty
Yeah.
much. If they backed out on the contract, they would have lost their money, which they were in a financial position to deal with. The guy didn't even let them take the mortuary equipment out of the home. In one of the documentaries, Carmen quoted him as saying, "It'll make for a good talking piece." Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, when you all the people they were bringing over to the house and showing. By the way, this is something I don't know if you were going to get to this, but I feel like it's a good time to bring it up. I don't know if they knew about this. It would make things a million times worse if they did. Apparently, what a lot of people don't know about with the Connecticut family haunting, and we'll get into the actual creepy, crazy stuff in a little bit, but this kind of sets the stage. There were apparently allegations that the mortuary staff had engaged in criminal activity, including necrophilia, which is sleeping with a dead person. My gut reaction is like all the shit that was swirling around with his family and the issues they were having. I get it seems possible that somebody would make something up like that to try to break a certain contract to get out of the house. However, just the sheer fact that that is out there and it was covered in newspapers, there are disciplinary records showing that there were some shenanigans going on, but there was never any prosecutions tied to those claims. So, but I think that really adds a little bit of creepy spice to the whole story. Gross stuff.
Yeah, that is pretty gross. And I did come across that as well when I was looking up this topic. Yeah, like you mentioned, those allegations and those records of, some staff engaging in horrible behavior. Now, would that happening to those folks that were dead in that funeral home, like these are spirits that were their bodies were desecrated and they're
Mhm.
kind of just pissed off and they just lingered there and just took it out on this poor family with the kid with cancer that just moved
Oh
in.
my god.
So if you think
That's like,
about it from that
yeah.
perspective, that's kind of fucked up. It's like
Oh,
they
yeah.
didn't do anything, but who knows?
Um,
Maybe there was something more nefarious at play.
yeah, it could be, but I can't help but think too, there's a really old episode of, Always Sunny in Philadelphia where Frank, who's played by, Danny DeVito, I forget the context, but they were like, "Oh, when you die, we're gonna" No, 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 forget, like, "If I'm dead, just throw me in the trash. Just put me in if I'm dead, just throw me in the dumpster." The body is basically trash at that point. Let's jump to the next part, the creepy stuff, because that's what I think I'm most excited to hear about. You found a lot of good examples about what was going on at the time, and pretty much, I think you said stuff just started happening almost instantaneously after they moved in. And let's hear about that.
Yep. Immediately, shortly after they moved in, the family reported experiencing unusual phenomenon. So, of course, we had the foul odors coming out of nowhere. And of course, it was odors of decay, rotting flesh. You had the prototypical lights flickering on and off. And of course, you would have the physical manifestation of dishes being smashed, doors being slammed, cabinets being open, your whole nine of, your typical hauntings, that the start of a haunting that folks usually encounter. When it came to the kids, reported seeing shadowy figures and hearing strange voices. Philip claimed that he would hear this voice call out to him. So whether he was alone or he was with someone else in the house, he would hear this voice calling out to him, telling him to come to the basement. There were times that Philip claimed that the voice would tell him to commit acts of violence against people in the home. One documentary that I watched said that the voice would sometimes be a deep voice of an angry man, and sometimes it would sound like his mother. It's interesting how the ghostly voice decided to change to get this kid's attention. And on top of that, don't forget that he is a teenager. This kid is dealing with cancer. He's a teenager. I'm sure he's dealing with some hormonal things. And he's being afflicted by this entity or whatever, either mimicking his mom's voice or basically giving him commands in this very dark, evil voice, telling him to do violence and do horrible things to people in the family.
Yeah, another thing too that I wanted to circle back to just really quickly and tie it into the voices and stuff. Did you know that like it wasn't just a casket hoist and embalming tools that were left over? Like there was a no kidding blood drainage pit. Like there was a
Yeah.
hole in the ground. The reason I wanted to bring that up, going back to what you said, where they were hearing voices, but they're also smelling smells. So it makes sense to me analytically thinking like, okay, well, if there's like if it's like raining or something, like even the house that I'm in is like relatively new, and sometimes when it rains really heavy we get this smell that kind of comes back up through the pipes or whatever. But I imagine it's kind of like a similar situation. Like if you're pouring blood down a drain for years, that coagulated blood is likely sticking to the pipes that are down there, and if there's a backflow, it's going to create like an upward draft that might be smelly or something like that. But to hear voices, especially like gruff, deep, angry voices in conjunction with the smells, it sounds like that's what was happening. It wasn't just like they smelled the smells sometimes by themselves, but they also experienced moments where they heard the sound and then simultaneously smelled the smell. And remember, we've talked to people before who have had their own firsthand experiences with paranormal entities or whatever. There was like 2 or 3 people in like less than a month that we talked to who all had this story about hearing or seeing some man or some old person, but then they also smelled smoke in addition to having that visual experience. So I love hearing the haunting stuff that has to do with smells. It kind of makes sense more to me that like, okay, if you see a spirit, maybe you have something with your brain, or there's something, with our ocular system that allows some people to see certain things. Maybe these things become corporeal temporarily that allow us to see them. But when it comes to smell, even to a lesser extent, the voice, because you need vocal cords to create some kind of sound. You need something to create a sound vibration. If you have a disembodied voice that's doing that, that's fascinating. But even more so, if you have a disembodied smell and there's no source for it and it's caused by some paranormal entity, like that is scary, but that's fascinating to me.
It's one of those things when you have a foul odor in your house, you go like, okay, I either need to clean, you can investigate where the smell is coming from. But if you do like a fucking deep cleaning and everything's maintained and you still smell like a rotting smell, and I think the next thing I would do is like, okay, let me get the gas company out here and make sure there's no leak or something,
Yeah.
And if you do all of that and you still smell that, I don't know, man. It, it's got to be something.
What would you rather have had? I know the answer already, but this is just for funsies. And if you
Gas
could
leak.
play at home too, if you're listening. Yeah, yes, that's how I wasn't going there, but I guess that's how you want to go, huh? You just want to just slip off into the night. I was going to ask, what would you rather have happen to you? You have to pick one. You're going to be haunted.
Okay.
Would you rather see something out of the corner of your eye, like briefly, like a shadow, like a figure, like thing, just but briefly? It's not going to jump scare you. It's just like a figure moving out of the corner of your eye really quickly. Or would you rather hear, like Chris or something like that, like really quickly? Or would you rather smell like this rotting flesh, terrible smell? And I'll give you a little bit of leeway here. Like, I'll just tell you that each case that you could experience only lasts no more than 5 seconds. So would you rather hear like one voice, like curse, like one smell, like, ugh, or like, would you rather see a ghost going by like, ooh?
I'd pick to see something out of my peripheral.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I don't want to hear nothing. I don't want to smell nothing. Well, it
No
depends on
ghost.
what you're seeing. If
Right.
it's like
Yeah.
I'm seeing your traditional, like, the way they depict some like monsters and stuff and demons, like, fuck that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not really a
Yeah.
great option. None of the options are great options, to be honest
Well,
with you.
I'll take the ghost fart. Yeah,
That's exactly what's happening. Just
probably.
farting in front of your face.
Dude, that must happen. Like, like all these things we hear about these stories, like moving objects, and like if you're still making sound and making smells in the afterlife, there has to be like random moments of just funny, like just farting and all kinds of stuff like that. Just it has to happen. There's no way it doesn't happen.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, man, coming back to Philip, the worst thing that someone going through paranormal experiences can potentially deal with is if you're a child, you're a teenager going through this type of thing and you go and tell your parents and they don't believe you. And this is exactly what happened to Philip. He complained to his mom, Carmen, of hearing voices and seeing shadowy figures. Carmen initially dismissed it because she thought, he was stressed out from illness and his treatments. But then the complaints started to grow darker because Philip started talking about menacing spirits of hands reaching out in the night and tormenting him while he slept. To make matters even worse, his younger siblings started to whisper about things that moved on their own, about feeling cold drafts that no one could explain, seeing shadows that didn't belong to them. You could take this one way or another. Carmen starting to feel like she was being watched as she moved throughout the house kind of helps validate what the kids are going through, because there's many a times where kids will have paranormal experiences and the adults won't, and then they just completely invalidate what the kids are going through.
Yeah, I mean, I was just talking to my wife about this the other day, but like it's so strange how our generation, and by our generation I mean like millennials, maybe to a lesser extent like the generations that came after us. I don't really know a lot, like I don't have a lot of friends in that age group, but at least for millennials, like we have different outlooks on things that I feel like our parents did. As my kids grow up, like I will with a laser focus like if they have an experience like that, I will never ever write it off. I mean, I'm not going to feed into it and unless it's really funny. I'm like, oh, you heard a ghost? I think I saw a ghost too. They like mess with them. But seriously, like if they had like an experience that they were serious about, I'm gonna ask them questions. I'm gonna be like, okay, well, what do you think it was? Like, what did you see? What's going on? I told you the other day, like there's been some weird stuff going on around the house lately. Blows my mind that you can have these stories, and it makes sense, I guess, because this is just the way people were back then. But it blows my mind that you can have a kid who is going through something and they're claiming to see stuff, and you just write it off. It's just like, man, you're not seeing shit. Like, don't make stuff up and blah blah blah. I guess it could be a way of the parent to avoid something that they don't want to deal with. Maybe they think it's possible, but they're just kind of like forgetting about it in a forceful way. But I still get this sense, like even when we were growing up, that parents really didn't believe in that at all, and they just didn't want to hear it. You said that in the past, I think, about your dad, right? Like your dad was, when you were growing up, he was like that, where he's just like, meh, whatever. Like, I don't give a
Yeah,
shit. Like,
right. Yeah. It was like all
and
of
then he
them,
started like,
dude.
yeah, I
It
know.
was like all of them. But before we go on, let's hear from the Snedekers themselves. So this is an interview that took place with the Snedeker family. Now, the video says that this took place in the 80s, but I'm thinking it was probably more early 90s or something of that sort, or at least like
Yeah.
1988 or 88 to 89. But yeah, let's hear from the Snedekers themselves. And this short clip is under fair use for educational purposes. So don't try to sue us.
It was the most crippling thing I've ever been through in my life, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone.
Now, Michael, you actually saw ghosts. What did they look like to you?
It took different forms. When I seen it, I would see it in different shapes. The first time I seen the ghost, it appeared in cat-like eyes glowing up on the ceiling, looking down at my bed. And the second time I seen it, it appeared as my little sister. The lights were taken out of the sockets on the ceiling.
Oh,
And
creepy.
I looked over because they were flashing on and off, and there was no bulbs in there. And I looked over, and it looked like my sister, and she was laughing at it when she was flicking off the switch like that. And then I got up to go over to her, and she went running up the stairs. And I went into the living room with where my mom and cousin were, and I asked them if Jenny just came running through, and they said no, she's been in bed all night. And I said 5 minutes ago she was down in my room turning on and off the lights.
And you knew that that wasn't so. Did
No.
it have a voice, any kind of a strange?
It had several voices. Sometimes it would take on the voice of one of the children to come into the room. It would say, "Mommy, Mommy," and it would be the sweet voice of your child. And you turn, and there would be this dark presence of a smoke figure just standing there laughing at you. And then other times it had the deep, raspy voice where it would insult and shout profane things and insult you. It was horrible.
Dude, I gotta say, my first takeaway from that, I get some sincerity in his voice. I don't like the mom, maybe not so much. Like she seems like she's kind of milking it, but like that kid, he definitely experienced something.
Right. Yeah. That's where I'm at too. Because with the kids, like of course kids can fib. It is a thing. Some kids will do things to get attention. But when all of your kids are reporting the same thing in like different isolated incidents, I think at that point you gotta pay attention.
I mean, the mom's story was interesting too. She mentioning that there was a lot of profanity being flung around by whatever disembodied voice. But in addition to that, here is another example that we've heard many times before of the ghost taking some kind of like almost ethereal, smoky, misty form. And that's an interesting one too, right? Like if you're listening to this show, like you've heard us talk before, we've done a few interviews, but only a few where people have brought up this apparition that they've seen that is smoke like. And the interesting thing is that to me, that's not what I think of when I think of like seeing ghost or whatever. I think of like transparent, translucent figure, maybe some shimmering or whatever, or even like a blob, but not smoke. Smoke to me is it's very fluid. Just watch a candle burn, like the way that the smoke actually moves through the air and whatnot. It's kind of like alluring and creepy. But that's why that to me that gives some credibility to her story, because if she was making it up, she probably would just stick to the whole like, oh, it's just I saw an image, or like I saw translucent blah blah blah. But you don't hear people talking about smoke like entities. And for her to come up with that on her own, if she was making it up, she would have to have done a lot of research, and she would have had to picked a story, like a lie that made it seem like it was more unique, which is possible. But again, I still think that there's more credibility just for the fact that she brought up she saw like some kind of smoke entity. That's what sticks out to me, at least.
The entity being smoky, that's not the first time we've heard about that. But okay, listeners, that's the first time we kind of inserted an external audio clip into the show. So I hope you enjoyed that, and that provides a little bit more context. When we do our research, if we can find more of that from folks that experience the haunting themselves, just, getting it straight from the horse's mouth, we will definitely include that moving forward more frequently. But continuing back with the story, like the video said, they gave a pretty good description of what they experienced, or at least one of the kids experienced, and what the mom experienced. Dean, there was a part of the story that I was hesitant to bring up in the discussion, but I'll bring it up and I'll do a quick disclaimer that it involves sexual assault that both Carmen and Al experienced. So, in the interview that we just played earlier on within the interview, Al and Carmen detail how some unseen force would get into their bed at night and assault them, and they would feel it physically. And they described it
Whoa.
as the most terrifying and painful experiences they've had in their lives.
Fuck, that's terrible. There was a movie actually that I swear it was like a haunting and something, and it was based off a true story. We could have to do research on that, but there were like degrees of that similar thing happening. And that's something that we have never come across. That actually, that's not, well, I don't think we've ever talked to anybody who experienced that from an entity, right? Like that's a first for us on the show to talk about that. It's a difficult topic to probably hear. So apologies if it's hard to hear, but especially the part where they were saying that it hurt. I feel like that's one of those things too where if you were making it up, like you would just be like, yeah, the thing assaulted me sexually, and then they would just, that would be it. They might go into some details, but the people who experience this, they're like talking about, no, it was painful. Like, okay, yeah, that's like, I feel like, why would you, if you're making up, why would you add that? You would probably not think to add that to the story. Have you ever heard of paranormal sexually assaulting anybody before? Because I don't think I have.
The only thing I've heard of that could be kind of similar in that manner is encounters with an incubus and a succubus.
Yes, good point. We did an episode on that a long time ago.
Yeah, we did over 100 episodes ago, probably.
Wow,
Just
Night
crazy to
Hacks.
talk about. Yeah,
Mhm. A
yeah.
classic.
Well, Well, with night hags, it was just more sleep paralysis, but I think
That's
incubus and
true.
succubus, it was more in that nature.
Right. Yeah.
Alongside Carmen experiencing that, she said that her niece, Tammy, who was, I think she might have been either the same age as Philip or maybe a year or two older, also complained to Carmen that, hey, I'm experiencing these weird things as well. So that's another facet that you throw into this situation here. But shifting the focus back to Philip here. With Philip, the changes in behavior started to occur. He would have sudden rages and violent behavior that they would never see before. He started to have obsessions with the macabre. He became fascinated with the mortuary equipment in the basement, spending long hours there. Some reports claim that he described seeing dead people or spirits. Philip would tell his parents that he saw shadowy figures moving throughout the house. He claimed to hear voices urging him to commit violent acts and even to harm his family members. These voices started to grow so persistent, according to Philip, and troubling that his parents ended up fearing for everyone's safety in the home. Unfortunately, at one point, Philip's disturbing behavior escalated so severely that he was briefly institutionalized for a psychiatric evaluation. But after going through the psychiatric evaluation, the doctors that performed it chalked his experiences up to hallucinations and being brought on by medication, his cancer, or the stress of everything that was going on. But still, the family believed that the house itself was influencing him and that the demons were using Philip as a conduit. And I think that's an interesting aspect there, because is he not the perfect target? He's a teenager going through a lot of hormones, going through a lot of emotional swings. He's suffering from cancer. He's going through some rigorous cancer treatment. He's probably down in the dumps because he doesn't know if he's going to live or die. He's starting to get into all of this macabre type of shit. He's starting to have an obsession over the mortuary equipment. Makes him the perfect conduit for type of paranormal activity if this type of entity is trying to feed off of him, which to me,
Yeah.
it sounds like it is.
You know what's fascinating? You brought it up twice throughout the recording so far. You were mentioning that Philip was becoming violent and lashing out. Each time you brought that up, I'm wondering, I wonder what he actually said. So I looked it up, and it turns out that apparently he did two things during these lashing out moments. The first big one was he threatened to kill his family, and he claimed that he was under demonic possession. He was already kind of aware because he had a fascination with the macabre and whatever, but like he was already aware of the idea that like demonic possession is there, out there. He's claiming at the time, like, I can't help it. There's a demon in me. I'm going to kill all of you. I'm going to kill my family. So that's pretty serious, right? But the other thing that I find fascinating, even more so actually, is he apparently described in his head seeing disturbing images of necrophilia. I don't think we could find this out. I don't think this was anywhere in the research that we did, and you would probably have to do some serious investigating to figure out, like, get it close to an answer. But I wonder if he knew about the alleged necrophilia charges in the mortuary that were going on before they moved in there, because that didn't come out till later and he didn't know about that. That would be really fascinating, right? If he's seeing images of like really violent images of necrophilia in his mind and he's lashing out at these times, but he didn't know about that happening before, then that is a huge red flag. Like, okay, that you have something going on there if that's the case.
I agree. So the timing of when he knew this stuff and all this additional information came out, I think that's an important point that you bring up there. But things got so bad to the point that the family claimed anytime they left the home, that wouldn't provide any escape to them. Whatever entity was in the home would follow them. Carmen made claims that the entity would follow her at work. Al made claims that the entity would follow and harass him at work as well. What I saw in the haunting documentary, I don't know if this is true or if this was part of the show for dramatic effect, but like the demon like turned his car on and like rammed it into wherever he was working and just like nearly killed him. So listeners, if you have not watched that episode of A Haunting, go ahead and check it out. Pretty creepy if that actually happened. But it got so bad to the point that the family, like everybody just started hunkering down in the living room. Like they would just put the mattresses down and everybody would sleep together because they felt comfort and strength in numbers. And I think that's a common thing people do in these types of situations. Like, nobody wants to be alone. So the likelihood of something happening to someone because there are other people around, they believe, is slim to none.
Or there were a couple things that I think are interesting and worth mentioning before we get into the Warrens, because like to me, the series of events leading up to the Warrens is almost as important, if not more important, to setting the stage for when the Warrens actually come in, because it's going to help us give some context about how the Warrens approach it and the criticism that might be going around and at the time when they were entering the scene. But there's a couple interesting things here. So the dumbwaiter is something we didn't mention yet. There was apparently a dumbwaiter that was used for loading and unloading bodies or moving them around in the mortuary when it was in business. And I think that's crazy. Like, of course, the mortuary makes embalming and all that stuff. I never knew, but it makes sense that these homes would require some kind of way to move the bodies to the basement and then back up. So just the sheer fact that you're in a house with that empty column of nothingness in that dumbwaiter would just be creepy enough, right? Like I imagine that would be super haunted. But anyway, the one story that jumps out to me the most is that happened to Carmen. So Carmen was apparently taking a shower one evening, and the shower curtain began to cling to her body. Like, that's not something new, right? Like, we've all experienced that at one point or another. But the strange thing about the shower curtain attaching to her body was it would seem to rise up to her. Like, it wouldn't just kind of like flow and bump into her. It was like actually like rising up to her side. When she was blinded with shampoo at this time, she heard what sounded like her niece Tammy, who was staying with them at the time, like you mentioned, and she thought that the curtain was being moved by Tammy, but Tammy wasn't even around. Like, she, washed the soap off. She looked around and nobody was in there to move the curtain, hear the giggles or whatever. Like, to me, that is like, fuck that. Who wants to be in the shower and then like have something like that happen? Because that's just the worst place to be haunted, in my opinion.
See, that's why I like shower doors. There's no chance of that.
Right? Until you see a figure on the other side, like, press up against it.
Yeah, that'd be fucking creepy. And it turns out it's some weirdo that just broke into your house. Like, get out of here, dude. Fucking creep ass. But anyway, do you want to segue into your favorite people?
Old Ed and Lorraine. So Ed and Lorraine were called in by the Snedeker family, which anytime someone takes their like under their own effort to reach out to the Warrens, you could say like, well, they must have been really struggling with this paranormal activity. They were really desperate. But at the same time, it's like, oh, you called the Warrens, who were really famous at the time. And regardless, they bring them in. Carmen was basically the one who reached out. She took the initiative and she reached out to Ed and Lorraine. Ed and Lorraine came relatively quickly. This started in 1988. So this was a couple years after everything was going down. They have been not able to escape these paranormal experiences. Like, they were getting it wherever they went. The air was relatively heavy for them, and they were just probably exhausted if all this stuff was really happening, and so they needed some outside help. The Warrens apparently theorized at the time, like, as soon as they got in there, they're like, you definitely have paranormal activity, but we're thinking that this is demonic. We're not thinking this is like human-based hauntings, which is interesting, right? Because you're talking about another case where a potential demonic entity is taking the form of a little girl or, a disembodied voice or whatever that would normally be thought to be a human, but it's not. It's, it's basically a mimic or whatever. That's what the Warrens are claiming. They're thinking that this is some evil entity that is separate from the human souls.
So with the Warrens, they theorized that one of the funeral workers was involved with committing necrophilia, which you mentioned earlier, and that it was part of a satanic ritual. What's interesting is that accompanying the Warrens for this investigation was John Zaffis. So he's a paranormal investigator in his own right. He's a paranormal specialist because he has become popular as a collector of haunted objects, and he himself experienced some of the terror that was affecting the Snedekers firsthand. So John Zaffis accompanied the Warrens for many days and nights as they investigated the house. Zaffis said that one night, spending the night in that home, he found himself undergoing phantomania. So for folks that don't know what phantomania is, it's a form of sleep paralysis that's rooted in supernatural origin and can cause someone going through this great and mental and emotional anguish. So while John was going through this bout of phantomania, at the same time, Carmen was in another room undergoing a supernatural attack. So John would later comment on the situation by saying that terrifying visions accompanying the phantomania were simultaneously occurring in both him and Carmen at the same time. So, of course, when the Warrens get involved in this case, words start to spread. And there were a pair of scientists, scientific instructors, that wanted to come and debunk the home as being haunted. So they come in, they're there at night, and in the early midnight hours, these two scientists end up fleeing in the middle of the night because they were so rattled by what they experienced, and they ended up moving to another state completely. So after all of the investigation, the Warrens decided, hey, we need to seek out an exorcism. They ended up contacting the Bishop of Hartford, voicing their concerns that Catholic help would be needed. So the bishop ended up directing a couple of priests to go to not only bless the home, but also hold a sacred Catholic mass inside the home as well. So they held the mass, I believe, in Latin and English. During that mass, Ed ends up suffering a mild heart attack, and he believed that it was caused by one of the demonic entities that did not like the fact that Ed was partially responsible for having Catholic priests being present in the home.
Dude, that's heavy. Like, I knew that there was a medical thing that Ed had gone through at some point during investigating, and I didn't realize it was this one. That I must have missed that in my research. But so he had a mild heart attack. Dude, I can't imagine trying to investigate a haunting that you think is demonic, and you have like priests going exorcism and whatnot, and then suddenly you just start having a heart attack. That's terrifying. You would literally feel like the life was being squeezed out of you by whatever evil force you were trying to get out of the house. Man, what do you think about that? That's crazy.
I think it is a possibility that, whatever these entities are, they could have potentially attacked him because they had a hand in getting the Catholic Church involved in this situation. So it's not out of the realm of possibility, because you do hear that from time to time in which, folks performing exorcisms are physically attacked, whether by the possessed or some unforeseen force. So yeah, not out of the realm of possibility for something like that to happen. So they end up proceeding with the exorcism. They end up concluding the exorcism. After the religious ritual, the Snedekers ended up reporting that the activity had stopped. The family eventually moved away. The house later had new tenants. Here's where the controversy comes in. This is kind of an interesting one because skeptics point out inconsistencies in the Snedeker story. Some tenants before and after them said they did not experience anything unusual, and some critics argue that the events may have been exaggerated or fabricated. But for the Snedekers themselves, they maintain that resolution came when the Warrens' intervention cleansed the house. So what are your thoughts on this case?
Yeah, that last part, man, like how convenient. I just think it's funny that they came back and basically the Warrens or whoever were claiming that things were going on, they just said like, oh, you're not new tenants, the new people who bought the house, you're not experiencing anything. That's because we completely got rid of all the spirits with our exorcism. That's a convenient thing to say at that time, I think, because you just happened to fix it like right before they moved out, like right before the Snedekers moved out, and nothing ever happened again after that. Possible. I do think that there is definitely some embellishment going on, particularly Carmen. Like there's something about Carmen, watching her. And like I said earlier, like I think Philip, he definitely went through some shit and he probably believed he saw something. But I do think that Carmen seems like she had been milking this situation a little bit, but I still think it's plausible just for the sheer fact that they moved into a former mortuary and there was like a dumbwaiter for bodies and a blood hole in the floor and embalming equipment left over. That is enough to be like, okay, that's, I believe that there's probably something going on here. Then again, I have heard stories, and I think we even might have talked to somebody at one point, or I have in the past, where, someone who lived in a mortuary with their family. Actually, I think I went to high school with a kid who whose family was in that business. Now that I think about it, you know, you hear stories sometimes from those people that maybe some things happen, it's creepy, but I think for the most part, people who are working as morticians or in some kind of like, you know, body handling process after death, like they just don't experience anything at all. It's just a job, you know, it's just a thing that you do, and like the bodies are empty. There's nothing associated with them. They don't have anything creepy happening. I think that there's a good amount of credibility to this just for the sheer fact that there were so many dead bodies going through that house for so long. And it was built in 1919, I think. It's a really old house, even at the time back then. The fact that Philip was going through this terrible time when a lot of negative energy was swirling around him. He had cancer or Hodgkin's lymphoma, and the parents were not really making a good living. I think I read that Carmen was a waitress at the time, but they definitely did not make a lot of money. So they were probably struggling, and that stress was probably there. And like you said earlier, add on to that he was a teenager going through all this hormonal stuff. Man, that must have been a swirl of negative energy constantly. So I think, like, yes, I would definitely stamp this like plausible, but just for the sheer fact that the Warrens came in and supposedly like expunged everything. And I'm sure the Snedekers probably got a cut at some point in their lives of whatever movies were made for, you know, from this situation.
You know, it's interesting
So
you
I don't
say
know.
that, because at
Oh,
first they
yeah,
were relieved with the Warrens' help, but
yeah.
afterward their tune started to change and sometimes they became critical. Felt like the Warrens were more interested in the paranormal case than the actual family suffering. And then there was a
Yeah.
book that came out, written by Ray Garton. There was a lot of controversy about that as well. So in the aftermath, there was some controversy because there were claims that, you know, some of your stories don't line up, and some people claim, well, their stories do line up. After all of that going on, you know, it's just, you know, filled with controversy, especially because this became a published book. And once you do that, it's like, okay, most people, when they go through hauntings, they kind of like just want to get it off their chest, get this shit away from me, and
Yeah.
let's move on with our lives. But once you start incorporating, make a book out of this, let's make a movie out of this,
Yeah.
you know, it kind of starts to question your credibility, you know? I'm
But
saying,
I
like,
like
let me
that
put it
you,
this way.
yeah.
Let me put it this way. If I got approached by like Netflix to do an episodic series about like the bullshit that I went through, and they're like, we'll give you like $20 million, I'd be a fucking dumbass to turn that down. But I think the one thing that I would want to keep in that type of situation, you know, if you're going to change the people involved, that's fine, but at least make it as accurate as possible, type of thing. You know, when you're in that type of situation and maybe they were offered some life-changing money, it would probably have been stupid for them to turn it down. But
Sure.
as
Yeah.
far
I
as
feel
like
you.
what they experienced, and I know the whole thing about, you know, tenants, previous tenants and the next set of tenants not experiencing anything, maybe, just maybe, their son, because of the situation that they were in, provided whatever was there, the conduit that it needed to manifest itself, with the negativity and him being down in the dumps because of his situation, the family going through a lot of stress. That's a lot of negative energy that people are dealing with. And we know, if this story is true, that these type of entities feed off of negativity. So I will lean more towards believing the Snedekers, because fuck, it's a funeral home. You're moving into a funeral home where like
Right.
hundreds of dead bodies have passed through. I've like scrolled through social media and on TikTok, and I've come across weird experiences that morticians have experienced working alone in funeral home. And some of the shit they've said and seen is
Yeah.
fucking terrifying. So
Yeah. It does happen. Yeah.
yeah, even though the Warrens are involved and there's a whole controversy of the book and the movie, I still think this is a little bit more credible than some of the others. Well, like we shared with the clip earlier, these people are willing to go on national television and put their reputation on the line to
Right.
explain what they went through. And most
Yeah.
people, if they're bullshitting, they'll cower away from that.
And I think too, you brought up a good point that is worth mentioning. The Snedekers had reached a point, like you said, where they just got frustrated, maybe even a little bit just straight up angry at the Warrens, because they felt like the whole time that the Warrens were in there, they were trying to make it look like something more than it was. Kind of like entertainment purposes, sort of. They share this thought that they got the sense that it was kind of more focused on getting the right angle and making sure that they focused on getting rid of the entity on whatever, but they weren't really focusing on the family themselves. So that, I think, that gives some credibility back to the family, the Snedekers, because if they came out later and they said like, well, we didn't really feel like the Warrens were there for us, they were there for them, sort of thing, I think that is a big thumbs up for this story being at least partially true from their angle, that they really did go through something. Because why would you come out and say that after? Unless somebody was criticizing you after and it was actually damaging your life, which I don't think was going on. I think that it's highly unlikely that they would just come out and throw shade at the Warrens and try to draw attention back to them. They must have gone through something, is my takeaway there.
I'm right there with you. And folks, what are your thoughts on the whole Snedeker story and the haunting in Connecticut? Do you think there's some truth to this? Do you think the Snedekers were making this up to make money together with the Warrens? Or did the Warrens over exaggerate? Or did the author of the book over exaggerate, made this lose credibility? Let us know your thoughts, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode.
And one more thing, more fascinating than anything else, if you have your own, I grew up in a mortuary, or you are a mortician and you have weird things that happen around dead bodies, please, like that's something I would love to talk to a mortician who had weird experiences. That'd be such a great show.
Oh, absolutely. So if that is you, reach out to us, send us your story, or come on the show. You've reached the end of tonight's journey on the Wandering Road. This show is written, hosted, and produced by me, Chris, and alongside my co-host, Dean. If you've got a scary story of your own, or if you'd like to join us as a guest, send your tale to twroadpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to follow us on social media for more haunted fun. And if you enjoyed tonight's episode, please rate, review, and share the show. It helps keep the lantern burning for fellow travelers. Until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your mind in the shadows, because the wandering never ends.